Picture this, the Soviet Union in the mid-1920s, a time of relative calm after the upheaval of the Russian Revolution and the Civil War. The nation, under the firm grip of Joseph Stalin, was starting to rebuild, to grow from the ashes. Stalin, a man of iron will, was consolidating his power slowly but surely, turning the Soviet Union into a monolithic entity under his command. In tandem, the first five-year plan was introduced. It was a bold, ambitious attempt to transform the Soviet Union from a primarily agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse. But beneath the surface, the seeds of discontent were sown. The plan, though grand on paper, led to widespread hardship, discontent, and disillusionment among the masses. It was under this backdrop that the stage was set for one of history's most brutal political purges, the Great Terror. Fast forward to 1934, the murder of Sergei Kirov, a prominent Communist Party member, sparked what would become known as the Great Terror. The death of Kirov, although tragic, served as a catalyst for a series of events that would reshape the Soviet Union forever. In the aftermath of the assassination, Stalin, a shrewd and calculating leader, seized the opportunity to consolidate power. He claimed that Kirov's death was part of a larger conspiracy against the communist regime. This supposed conspiracy became the perfect excuse for Stalin to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat. Thus began the Purges, a brutal campaign of political repression and persecution. Stalin's consolidation of power was swift and absolute. He maneuvered within the party ranks, removing those he deemed disloyal or untrustworthy. His actions were not limited to the political elite. Ordinary citizens found themselves caught in the crossfire. Accusations of disloyalty or anti-Soviet sentiment were enough to warrant arrest and often execution. The purges were not a random act of violence. They were meticulously orchestrated, designed to instill fear and compliance among the populace. Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, played a crucial role in this process. They were the executors of Stalin's orders, carrying out arrests, interrogations, and executions with ruthless efficiency. The purges were not limited to the mainland. They extended to the farthest reaches of the Soviet Union. From the bustling cities to the most remote villages, no one was safe from Stalin's watchful eye. The fear of being labeled an enemy of the state was pervasive, turning neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. As the purges escalated, so did the climate of fear. Stalin's iron grip on the nation tightened, and the Soviet Union found itself in the throes of a reign of terror unlike any it had ever experienced. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, uncertainty, and dread. A wave of paranoia swept across the nation, marking the onset of the Great Terror. The Soviet Union had entered a dark and terrifying chapter in its history. The dawn of the Great Terror had arrived, and with it, a period of unparalleled fear and suffering. Between 1936 and 1938, the Soviet Union was gripped by a frenzy of mass arrests and executions. This period, known as the Great Terror, was characterized by rampant paranoia, suspicion, and a brutal crackdown on perceived enemies of the state. At the heart of the Great Terror were the infamous Purges, a series of campaigns orchestrated by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD. The Purges were a sweeping, indiscriminate attempt to cleanse the Soviet Union of any individuals deemed disloyal or subversive. From high-ranking officials to ordinary citizens, no one was safe from the NKVD's watchful gaze. The purges were carried out through various methods of persecution. Arrests were often made in the dead of night, with the accused whisked away to unknown locations. Torture was a common tool of interrogation, used to extract confessions of fabricated crimes. The accused were then subjected to show trials, public spectacles designed to validate the regime's actions and deter any potential dissenters. These trials were anything but fair. The accused were often denied legal representation, and the verdicts were predetermined. Guilty verdicts were almost universal, with sentences ranging from long-term imprisonment in labor camps known as gulags to execution. The scope of the purges was immense. It is estimated that millions of people were arrested during this time, with a significant proportion executed or condemned to the gulags. The purges touched every corner of Soviet society, instilling a climate of fear that would persist for years to come. But the Great Terror was more than just a political purge. It was a systematic campaign of fear and repression, designed to consolidate power and suppress opposition. It was a time when the individual was subsumed by the state, when silence was survival, and when fear was the most potent weapon. The Great Terror was not just a political purge, but a systematic campaign of fear and repression. The Great Terror ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. In the aftermath of this chilling period, the Soviet Union found itself fundamentally changed. The societal and political consequences of the Great Terror were far-reaching and irrevocable. The fear and suspicion that had taken root during the purges did not dissipate with their end. Instead, they became a part of everyday life, lingering like a dark shadow over the nation. The Great Terror had ripped through every stratum of Soviet society, leaving no one untouched. Families were torn apart, communities were shattered, and trust between individuals was irreparably damaged. The climate of fear that had been cultivated during the purges continued to thrive, creating a society where silence was self-preservation and suspicion was a survival strategy. This paranoia permeated every aspect of life, significantly impeding the development of social connections and communal trust. Politically, the Great Terror had a profound impact on the Soviet Union. It served as a stark reminder of the absolute power held by the state and the lengths it was willing to go to maintain control. This period of intense political repression led to a significant consolidation of power, with Joseph Stalin's rule becoming virtually unchallenged. The purges weeded out potential opposition, ensuring that those who remained were loyal to the regime. The Great Terror also had a lasting impact on the Soviet Union's international relations. The brutality of the purges shocked the world, leading to increased isolation and suspicion from other nations. It marked the Soviet Union as a state willing to sacrifice its own citizens for the sake of political stability. In the wake of the Great Terror, the Soviet Union was a nation transformed. The societal and political structures that had been in place before the purges were irrevocably altered, replaced by a climate of fear and a political system characterized by absolute control. The Great Terror left an indelible mark on the Soviet Union, fundamentally altering its social and political fabric. The Great Terror was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of political repression in the 20th century. As we delve deeper into the annals of history, we find chilling parallels between the Great Terror and other instances of state-sponsored terror across the globe. Take, for instance, the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution. This was a period marked by political instability and mass executions, much like the Great Terror. The Committee of Public Safety, led by Maximilien Robespierre, orchestrated a campaign of fear and violence, sending thousands to the guillotine in the name of protecting the Republic. The echoes of Robespierre's justification for terror. Virtue, without which terror is destructive, terror without which virtue is impotent, can be heard in Stalin's own rationalizations. Moving eastward, we encounter the Cultural Revolution in China. Initiated by Chairman Mao Zedong in the mid-20th century, it was a decade of chaos and violence. Mao sought to purge the bourgeois elements from society and enforce communism. Millions were persecuted, and countless historical and cultural artifacts were destroyed. The Great Terror and the Cultural Revolution share a common thread. They were both driven by leaders who believed that their vision for their country justified any means, no matter how brutal. However, it's important to note that despite these similarities, each instance of terror was unique. The Reign of Terror was fueled by the revolutionary fervor of a newly formed republic, while the Great Terror was born out of the paranoia of a totalitarian regime. The Cultural Revolution was a misguided attempt to rekindle revolutionary spirit in a country that had already undergone a communist revolution. Such parallels offer us a broader perspective on the Great Terror. They allow us to understand it not just as an isolated event in Soviet history, but but as part of a larger global trend of political repression. And this, in turn, forces us to grapple with some uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and the lengths to which some will go to maintain it. The Great Terror serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of absolute power. The Great Terror was a dark chapter in Soviet history, a period marked by fear, paranoia, and widespread repression. It was a time when ideology and power conspired to create a climate of uncertainty and dread, where individuals were persecuted, often without reason, and society was held captive by its own leaders. The reasons for this grim period are manifold, rooted in political maneuvering, personal vendettas, and a skewed vision of societal order. The methods employed were ruthless, from purges to forced confessions, instilling a culture of fear that seeped into every corner of Soviet life. The consequences were far-reaching, casting long shadows over the political landscape and etching deep scars into the fabric of society. When compared to other regimes in history, the Great Terror stands as a chilling reminder of what can transpire when power is left unchecked and fear becomes a tool for control. As we delve into the annals of history, let us not forget the lessons of the Great Terror, a stark testament to the perils of unchecked power.
That's a wrap for today, folks. If you enjoyed, tap that like button. Don't miss out on the fun. Subscribe to stay tuned. The excitement is just beginning.